Well, hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Williams, Senior Editor at MGMA and host of the MGMA Podcast Network. We have a special episode for you today on New Year's Eve. It's our Best of 2025. So for this episode, we found 3 conversations that we had that really touched on, I think, 3 of the biggest topic areas in healthcare today. The first one is on finding and keeping good people, staffing. The second one is on choosing tools and technology that actually help. And then third, supporting the well-being of folks who are doing the work, our clinicians and our administrative people, finding support so they don't burn out. So whether you've heard these conversations before or this is the first time, I think there's some really good information in here and something that will help you as you build your practice in 2026. So let's get started. First up, we have Liz Mahan from AAPPR, and in our conversation, Liz talks about staffing, building a strategic recruitment playbook, and how to focus on retention from the very start. Let's go to that highlight with Liz right now.
I came up with this topic because it's a question I get asked a lot. Why can't you just give me something that will show me how to recruit? Give me what I need to recruit the doctors that I need. And my answer is always, if only it were that easy. Every doctor, every practice, every organization is different. Recruiting is more tactical than process-based. So what this presentation is going to look at is how to really identify what you need in a candidate, both clinically, interpersonally, in terms of their interests, their career trajectory, where they hope to see their practice growing, so that we can do that word I used at the beginning of this podcast, that recruit attention, so that we can find the candidates who have the staying power to be with a practice for years and years to come and really reduce that turnover. We know retention is so important. Turnover is expensive. It impacts patient access. It impacts patient satisfaction. It just has so many downstream effects if somebody leaves a practice. So we're really going to take a look at what practices, what organizations can do before they even start to meet with candidates to make sure that they have a playbook that's going to address all of the needs of the practice and really hone in on what makes the ideal candidate. Because I'll tell you, the ideal candidate does exist, but rather than kind of just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks, my Italian grandmother would be happy with that analogy.
Yes.
What we're going to do is really focus in on what we need so that we can be strategic about our search process and our interview process.
Okay. You said something in there that was really interesting to me, and I want to make sure I understand it. You said this recruitment is more tactical than process oriented. Did I get that right? And if I did, tell me, what does that mean? I'm not sure. Yeah. So there's not just step by step. You don't go step 1, 2, 3, 4, or what do you do?
There is. A process, though, is something everybody can follow. Okay. I can give any practice a checklist of, first you place the ad, then you look at CVs, then you do an interview.
Right.
That's the process is going to generally be the same for everyone. What we're talking about is everything that happens even before you get to that process. So really being strategic about what we're looking for in a candidate, being really very honest and realistic about where practices are individually. So where are they in terms of their culture? Where are they in terms of their vision for growth in the future? And then how does the ideal candidate fit into that? So I'll give a little teaser. One example I give is really looking at the makeup of the practice. So what providers do we have now? Do we have physicians that specialize in one particular area and now we're looking for a generalist? Or are we in a specialty practice that has a lot of subspecialists? And, what we need is sort of that bread and butter provider to see all of those sort of more general cases. Are we looking for somebody who can lead a practice? Or Are we looking for somebody earlier in the career who can really build their practice and grow into a leadership role? So really taking all of those little more nuanced things into account rather than just looking at that, that checklist that we have that says, first I place an ad, then I interview, then I make an offer. So, we're going to dive more into what happens on the front end in this presentation, and talk about how that can really positively impact your recruitment process by creating that playbook.
Right. And then as part of the playbook, do you get into the timeline, and do the practices know the timeline that it's going to take? What is it, 18 months, 2 years? What is y'all's statistic you use as far as the timeline?
It really varies depending on the region, depending on the specialty. It can be pretty broad. We will talk about the timeline. We will talk about how it's really important that everybody be on the same page around the timeline, that we be proactive about our timelines, that we try to get away from, a more urgent response, more reactive response, and build a pipeline in a more proactive way, and really spend some time doing some medical staff planning and looking at where the practice is going, maybe where we need to look at recruiting in the coming years and months, and getting out of the, reacting to sort of what's happening in terms of turnover and stuff. Because ultimately we want to recruit to retain. So we want to really manage that turnover and hopefully mitigate it in the long run.
Let's talk about common challenges then. You talk to a lot of practices, you help them find these solutions using this playbook, but when they come to you, I just want to see if our listeners, are nodding their head when you say whatever you're going to say. What is the common challenge that they're saying, Liz, help me with fill in the blank?
Yeah, Liz, help me. I need an X specialist yesterday.
Okay.
I didn't even put this in my presentation because we all know there's a physician shortage. We all know it's getting worse. I don't think that bears repeating. What we need to start doing to address it is to try to get ahead of it and to really try to recruit to retain instead of just finding that person who can fill that immediate need. I mean, that's great. It's great if we find a physician that can come in and do the job. But if the physician's not the right fit, if the physician, maybe isn't a right fit for the community because they love fishing and hiking, and you're in suburbia where all those things are an hour drive away, how happy are they going to be, in the long run? If they have a spouse that's looking for work in a particular field that isn't available in the area, and they either have a long commute or they're looking for a remote opportunity that may or may not be available, how does that work in the long run? So taking all of those things into account, again, to find that physician that's really going to have staying power and will be with the practice long term.
So once again, that was Liz Mahan, Director of Professional Development and Solutions at AAPR, talking about staffing. Next up is Julia Rosen, Senior Vice President of IT at MGMA. In our conversation, Julia talks about how practices should focus on real problems when they bring in new technology, not just chase buzzwords. She also touches on balancing tech with human care, managing legacy systems, and protecting patient data and security. Let's go to that conversation with Julia now. You've been at Centura, you were at Para, now you're at MGMA, but you've communicated with lots of healthcare leaders on that technology side. What are the big pain points in healthcare right now? What are some of the pain points for those medical practices, many or who are MGMA members?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it really comes, I've never run a medical practice, but a lot of what I hear from clinicians in the field is still around the burden of documentation. Yeah. Again, there's lots of great fancy tools out there, but when it comes down to it, a huge complaint of people in all aspects of the medical practice is I spend too much time on documentation, and I'm documenting at night when I want to be with my family. So I think that's still a huge burden, in nursing, for physicians. And again, I think that is a space where technology can really help.
Thanks for that. Mm-hmm. So next question then, let's talk about building sustainable tech infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I know nothing about tech from that architectural side of it, but when we're talking about building that infrastructure, and I'll use an example. Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, right at the holidays, Southwest just went down, Southwest Airlines, mm-hmm. and we learned more. My daughter was flying back to college, so we had to immediately find another flight from another airline. But what we found out, you may know more details than I do, but the way I understood it, they built a system, mm-hmm. and then they just, over a really long period of time, they just kept building onto it and building onto it and building onto it. And it was just a house of cards at a certain mm-hmm. point that fell that way. How do you build an infrastructure that works, that doesn't collapse under its own weight? What advice would you give there?
That is a very difficult question. And I laugh. I think the reason it's a very difficult question is because most healthcare practices are not going to be starting from scratch. Right. And that is a huge challenge, because even if you want to migrate to a new modern system, you're still going to have, whether it's on paper or in a legacy system, you're still going to have a ton of data that you have to migrate over. So I think when you're talking about infrastructure, at least from, it sounds like more on the software side mm-hmm. of things, I think one key is how do you control and get your data to a manageable size and to manageable patterns so that you can migrate it to a new system cleanly and or don't have this huge sort of bloat of, so much data that it slows down your systems or makes it hard to access things. So thinking about things like what's your retention period of data? Are you going beyond the minimum 10 years required by government regulations, thinking about things like being very careful when you're migrating systems, being very surgical about what data you really need from a clinician perspective to access in the new system versus what can be in cold storage or an archival system that you just take from time to time. So I think that's going to be the big challenge in healthcare is it's so rare that you can just start cleanly with a new modern system. You have to do this legacy data migration. It's required. So thinking really closely about how you can minimize the impacts of that migration to not overburden your system, as well as to make it easier for your clinicians to find the relevant information you need easily.
Another aspect of that is the security of the data that you have. Change Healthcare, that breach occurred last year. It was huge. Got into, I believe, I want to look at my stats here, 100 million individuals, were impacted by that data breach. How do we protect ourselves against the cybersecurity threats from a medical practice perspective? Yeah,
I think the biggest thing to think about is it's not if it's going to happen, it's when. It's a very common saying in cybersecurity. So really thinking about and taking actions around, in the case of ransomware, do we have immutable backups that are stored in an offsite location, and do we know how to restore from those? Mm-hmm. That piece is often overlooked, right? Yeah. Have we done things around practicing for a cyber attack? Tabletop exercises for if there were an incident of a breach, how do we recover? How do we communicate? So I think that's really the biggest piece. Obviously, there's lots that you can do in the vulnerability management area, but the reality is cyber criminals will always be a step ahead of the technology that we have, particularly when you're in a smaller organization. So I would say get a formal cybersecurity program commonplace. There are lots of vendors, even smaller vendors, who will help you do that for a reasonable amount of money. And then really look at your backup strategy, your incident response strategy, to make sure that when it does happen, you're really prepared, and it's very, again, surgical around what you do and how you'll respond.
Okay. Switching gears now, you had mentioned it to me earlier, but you're on the board of the Colorado chapter of HIMSS.
Yep.
Talk about that role, that relationship, what y'all are achieving in that field, in that side that you're working on.
Yeah, I love being on the board of HIMSS. It's such a great way to connect with other healthcare IT professionals in the community. Shameless plug, we have a lot of events coming up. We have a spring conference coming up. That's a great opportunity to learn about trends in healthcare and connect. But what I really, I'm hoping to focus on for this coming year with the board is how do we engage and get more folks interested in the healthcare IT profession. So I think traditionally HIMSS, a lot of the focus has been around engaging executives, which is great. We're still going to do that. But we've had talks internally within HIMSS of how do we make healthcare IT really an exciting career opportunity for people coming right out of college, early career folks, maybe transitioning from other IT disciplines into healthcare IT. I think that's going to be a really exciting part of the upcoming year. And I love being in healthcare IT. You get to be techie while also feel like you're, contributing to society and to your community. And it's a great career path. And I'm hoping we can get more people engaged and involved.
So once again, that was Julia Rosen, Senior Vice President of IT at MGMA. So in our final segment we're going to highlight today, it's a conversation we had this year with Dr. Michael Blackman. He's Chief Medical Officer at Greenway Health. Now, Dr. Blackman talks about a very important topic, how we can use automation and workflow tools to lessen the burden of administrative burden, pajama time, and even quite possibly burnout. In this conversation, Dr. Blackman focuses on approaches that might ease those pressures that often lead to burnout in medical practices. So let's go to that conversation with Dr. Blackman now.
We've talked about burnout for a long time.
Yeah.
And people have done different things and different approaches. Say, how can you eliminate burnout? You often hear about, people call it different things, but pajama time, people taking work home with them in the evening. Certainly when I was in full-time practice, I don't think we called it pajama time then, but I certainly did. Didn't call it that, but certainly brought stuff home.
Sure.
After I put my kids to bed, you can often find me sitting on the couch calling patients, and patients often be surprised they get a call from me at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. But that's when I had the time to do it, and it was important to catch up with them. AI, and people use the term very broadly, and it can mean a lot of different things.
Right.
But I think it comes down to what are the available tools that can really help. Think about it as an assistant. It's not a replacement, but an assistant. And there are some things that it can, replace in some tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Some tasks, it's an additional speed. I use AI tools a lot myself for doing different things. Even for something as simple as if I'm thinking about creating a presentation, I could sit and write an initial draft, and it might take me a while. I can equally take, AI and say, hey, what are the 7 things or 10 things you would talk about on this topic?
Right.
And then edit it from there. I think the point of it being an assistant is critical, especially if we get to other pieces like using AI for clinical decision support. Notice I said that support and not decision making. Mm-hmm. This still requires, human oversight and paying attention to what you're looking at. AI can still hallucinate in certain situations. So you got to make sure what's being presented is real and makes sense.
You make great points there. And we've talked about that before on this show. And obviously anyone who's interacted with the different AI tools that are out there, they'll be humming along, and then all of a sudden there's something, just as you said, the hallucination, the just getting things completely wrong. Or if you are looking at, as you were saying, making a presentation, it's not the right tone. It's not really hitting the
No.
way you want to address it. So I think what's so important, and this is the point we make a lot here, at least in this day and age, we're not replacing jobs per se, but what we're doing is really giving us, whether it's you, me, physicians, clinicians, anybody else out there, some really important tools. And then we have to use our wisdom, our knowledge, our education base. And it sounds like you've really dealt with that as well.
Yeah, it often comes up. People say, well, is it going to replace people? It's going to cause people to do different things. And I don't know where this quote originated. It's not mine, but I'm going to share it. People talk, oh, will AI replace doctors? And the short answer to that is no. But likely doctors who use AI may replace those who don't.
I love that quote. I mean, not for what it means for people's jobs,
Yeah.
but that's the reality that we're in. And I think the people who really are making that adoption to using the tools and using them wisely are going to be ahead of the ones who aren't. I mean, that's just the clear way to say it. So let's talk about a very specific AI tool. That's the one that Greenway's working with. It's Greenway Clinical Assist. Talk about that, because in the name itself, it's not Greenway Clinical Replace, it's Greenway Clinical Assist. Talk about a little bit about what you see in its usage as a tool and the way that you're seeing administrators and practice leaders using it.
So our vision for Greenway Clinical Assist is just that. It's an assistant that helps you, across the board as you're working your way through any variety of tasks within the practice. The place that it's starting is assisting with documentation. So at its core, it starts with being an ambient documentation solution. So as you're having a conversation with the patient, the system listens to the conversation and then writes a note based on that conversation, leaving in the pertinent medical parts and stripping out other pieces that it doesn't deem are pertinent. Now, going back to the comment I made before, you still need to read your note.
Right.
So you read it, you say, okay, yep, that makes sense. Or wait, it left out something I think is important. And you can then just tell it to put it back in. It's really very, very simple in that regard. But what it does do at its core, though, is it turns documentation from being what has traditionally been an after event, do all the work and now write down everything you did, to being a byproduct of the work you're already doing. So that in itself saves time.
Okay.
And at least, what we've seen with this, both in the literature and in direct conversations with providers, is it also creates, in a lot of cases, a more accurate note. Obviously in the course of a medical visit, you're talking to the patient, thinking about things, and the patient may say something you miss. It's just part of a conversation. When I've had conversations with physicians and others, when they say, well, wait a minute, this showed up in the note, I don't remember that coming up. We go back, we look at the transcript, and sure enough, it's there. And they feel like, wow, I missed that. Missed that comment. So I think that's important. One provider in particular said to me, he said, I'm getting to spend more focus on my patient. It's taking me less time, and it's generating a better note. Truthfully, I take any one of those three outcomes, let alone all three.
I would too. I wish I spent 25 years as a reporter, like jotting down notes or recording it and having to go back and transcribe it myself and spend a whole afternoon just typing up the interview. And now you can just get the audio, drop it into one of the different platforms, whatever it might be. And then in a minute or 5 minutes or so, you have the transcription. Now you can really use your analytical skills to decipher what's right, what's wrong in there. So I do want to follow up with you one more question about the product itself. How does it work in practice? Is it embedded in an app, or where is it located and how is it used?
Yeah, so the way it's embedded in an app. Walk in, start the app, and then just ignore it. Okay. Have a conversation, the usual conversation, usual interaction with the patient. And then when you're done, you simply hit the stop button It generates the note. You have a chance to review it, and then you press the other button, and off it goes right into the electronic health record. Now, I think one of the things that is different about this a little bit is that this may sound sort of obvious, but it can only record things in the note that the system hears. So, the way what one chooses to vocalize during the course of the visit has to change a little bit if you want that to show up in your note. For example, typically as you're doing the physical exam, you don't necessarily vocalize all of those findings. Right. You would just eventually write them down. But if you want the system to capture it, you have to say things like, what was your heart exam? What was your lung exam? What are your other findings? Now, personally, I think there's some benefit from that, just to conveying that information to the patient. But it's a necessary step if you wanted to do that. If you don't want it to and you want to put it in later, that's totally up to the user.
So once again, that was Dr. Michael Blackman from Greenway Health talking about using tools to lessen burnout. So I just want to thank you all for spending this day with us, your New Year's Eve. Hope you have a wonderful New Year's Eve. Stay safe out there, and Happy New Year.